You know what's fucking hilarious? When you start a video like 4 times and the maintenance men outside make enough fucking noise that you can't use the goddamn file. What's up, guys? It's week 2, Code 3 Fantasy Football. Glad to see you guys back. What an interesting week we've had. Teams that were great last week were absolute dog shit this week. Let's jump right into this. We're going to start off with the top team from last week, the Syphilitic Franks, Mark Wilton, who took on Got Melvin, the team of Aisha and Owen McKinney. The McKinneys get a win here, although I don't know that anybody would feel very good about a win, 77-51. Just an absolutely atrocious performance from both teams, minus the one output from Julio Jones. Everybody else scored less than 15 points. We had a 0 from Danny Amendola. This was bad. This was really bad. Mark actually scored more points on his bench than in his lineup, which is always a terrible situation. He had Deshaun Watson go for less than 8 points, while Lamar Jackson put up 36 plus on his bench. The only person to score more than 10 points on his team was T.Y. Hilton. The rest of his wide receiving core with T.Y. Hilton combined for 16.2 points. That is about half. It's exactly half. Or it's actually those three guys combined for twice as much as Robbie Anderson scored on his bench, which was 8.1. The running backs of Christian McCaffrey and Phillip Lindsay combined for 11.9, while Royce Freeman scored 10.2 on his bench. You add in Adam Thielen, who scored only 7.5, the kicker and defense getting next to nothing, and this is what you get. You get an absolutely terrible output of barely over 50 points, and Mark falls to 1-1, which drops him to the 8th spot, although the entire Bravo division sits at 1-1. So it'll be, after 2 weeks, we've got a really competitive division there with a team leading the way that looked really bad didn't look all that great in week 1. I take that back. They didn't look good this week. They looked very good in week 1. The McKinneys dropped Geronimo Allison for Nelson Aguilar and dropped Austin Hooper for the Minnesota defense. They did have like I said, a great performance from Julio Jones, but the 0 from Amendola, the combined 5.8 points from Joe Mixon and Duke Johnson were awful. Latavius Murray did not do well. Austin Hooper only scored 3.4, while Mark Andrews scored 22 plus on their bench. Raheem Mostert was on their bench as well, with 21 plus. This was a matchup ripe to have much more production, and it just fell incredibly flat. Somebody's got to win every week, but this is, and these are the games you have to win. When your team does not score all that much, you have to hope that your opponent does as poorly as humanly possible for you. Again, both these teams are 1-1. The entire Bravo division is 1-1, so that division is very well up for grabs at this point. We move on to the next matchup, which, again, a team that performed incredibly well last week looks like an absolute dud this week. That's going to be, if you ain't first, you're last, Matthew Trousdale, who took on his cousin, James McCloskey, the Fantasy Browns. And Matthew lays an egg as well, but this one has more to do with injury than anything else. Drew Brees puts up negative points. David Njoku throws up a 0 for him. James Conner leaves the game early with an injury. He just could not get rolling here. Puts up less than 60 on the week. Looks like he got 22.5 out of his wide receivers of Hopkins, Watkins, and Cooks, which is good, but it's certainly not enough, especially when, it kept pace with his opponent, James, who got 23.70 out of Kupp, Moncrief, and Evans, despite a 0 from Dante Moncrief. The running backs were about equal, 18-20 from Connor and Ingram, whereas James got 14.70 out of Kamara and Fournette. The difference really lies in the quarterback here, where Matt Ryan puts up almost 27 points and Drew Brees doesn't even put up as many points as I did. Because I put up 0 and he put up fewer than that. They do make a trade that goes through. It's a first trade of the young football season this year in Code 3. Matthew is going to receive Jimmy Garoppolo to replace Drew Brees, who was the only quarterback on his roster. James then receives Brandon Cooks, the number 2 or 3 wide receiver, depending on how you look at it, and Marquise Goodwin, who was a wide receiver on Matthew's bench. That pretty much solidifies James's wide receiver situation with Cooper Kupp, Mike Evans, Larry Fitz, and these 2 guys going forward. I see Dante Moncrief being an expendable piece here. He does drop Rex Burkhead in order to make room for this guy for this trade, and this trade went through this morning. I pushed it through. So going forward, we'll see how these guys do. Both these guys are in the middle of the pack of the Charlie division behind this guy. We'll get to my matchup soon. But a really solid matchup between the 2 of them. You know, Matthew certainly would want to put up more than 60, but he didn't really have anything on the bench to add other than Marquise Goodwin, and that really doesn't make the difference. We move on to Hanging with Hernandez, Corey Stearns, who took on Anthony Millard, the 7-footers. Corey came in 0-1, Anthony came in 1-0, and Anthony gets a 1.5 point victory here over Corey. Corey had a good week from Tom Brady and Devontae Adams and Nick Chubb and Kerryon Johnson, but the fact that he put up 2 zeros from Alshon Jeffrey and O.J. Howard, that's the reason you lost right there. You know, New England's defense put up 37 points. It was one of the highest scoring positions all week. But the 2 zeros from Jeffrey and from O.J. Howard are all the difference you need right there. Even if you were to put in the lowest scoring wide receiver from Corey's roster, which was A.J. Brown on the bench, who scored 2.5, he gets the win here. You know, 1.5 points is all it would have taken. And you can't take zeros when games are that close. Corey got over 30 from Chubb and Kerryon Johnson, almost 25 from Adams and Marquise Brown combined. No thanks to Alshon Jeffrey, who again, you know, looks like he's got a calf injury. He might miss week 3. Tom Brady all of a sudden has a questionable tag. He was limited with a calf injury. This is just Patriots stuff. I could see Tom Brady doing incredibly well this week, given his opponent. I believe it's the Bills. I believe it's the Bills. Going to Anthony's team, who's 2-0, and he currently leads the Delta Division. Jared Goff, Calvin Ridley, Kenny Galladay, Dalvin Cook, Greg Olsen. This team is loaded with guys who put up big games this week. Dalvin Cook putting up 30+, Galladay and Ridley 20+, and Goff 15+. Add in the fact that Matt Breida sat on his bench and scored 18+. You know, if he plays that guy instead of Marlon Mack, this game isn't even a question. Not a whole lot as far as question marks are concerned. Like, sure, Mason Crosby only scored 3 points, and Dallas's defense wasn't all that great against Washington. But you expect better performances in the future from those guys. So, great job by Anthony this week, getting a win in an incredibly close matchup and moving to 2-0 on the season. Our next matchup is going to be Mark's Mangina, Frank Marchione, who took on Sergio Landa. These guys came in. Again, Frank comes in 1-0, Sergio in 0-1, and Sergio gets a good 30-point win here to get himself right after last week. You know, he gets a good performance from Baker Mayfield, gets a great performance from Saquon Barkley, but Tariq Cohen just absolutely stinks up the joint with 2.5 points. You know, Aaron Jones is really the other running back on this roster. He gives him 26. Vance McDonald puts up over 15. And the wide receivers of Allen Robinson, Keenan Allen, and Terry McLaurin, they put up a combined 26.1. You know, nothing really to write home about on his bench. Stephon Diggs certainly could have played, but he ended up fumbling. He only put up less than 9 points. I can understand wanting to leave that guy on the bench after a really bad week one. For Frank, the difference really comes down to the fact that he played Carson Wentz, who only put up 15 points, while Dak Prescott was on his bench and put up over 30. That 15 points doesn't get him the win, but it gets him 15 points closer, and you can mitigate that kind of a loss. His wide receivers put up 22, a little over 22 and a half from Woods, Lockett, and Tyrell Williams. His running backs are going to carry him this year as Ezekiel Elliott and Austin Eckler put up 40 plus. But the tight end was weak. The flex position was 1 yard short of 100. So he gets 9.9 rather than the full 15. And kicker and defense was just serviceable. Sergio ends up dropping Giovanni Bernard and Anthony Miller and picks up the Green Bay defense for this week. I guess he doesn't like the Chargers going into Houston this week. Again, these guys are right smack dab in the middle of the Bravo division. All 4 of those teams are 1-1. They're all separated by points scored. So we'll see how these guys do going forward. We are going to finish up the first round of divisional play here in week 3. So before we go to interdivisional matchups. Moving on to my matchup with Hal Wyrick this week. I get a good solid 19-point win here against him, despite the fact that I lose Ben Roethlisberger and he only gives me a point and a half. Kirk Cousins is going to have to be my quarterback going forward, along with Andy Dalton, who's I picked up off waivers for Ben Roethlisberger. This team that I have, it's got plenty of decent players. I'm certainly open to a trade for a quarterback for anybody who's got a multitude of them, but I'm not desperate. I'm 2-0 now. I'm leading the Charlie division. My wide receivers put up 48 and change this week thanks to Chris Godwin and Tyler Boyd, despite the 8.5 from Juju. My running backs put up over 26 points with Bell and Henry. Travis Kelce put up over 20. And Devin Singletary is a nice surprise who put up 11.5. John Ross was on my bench with over 22 this week. That would have been a nice piece to have in my lineup, but when it comes right down to it, I still got a solid win over Hal, who, other than Patrick Mahomes and maybe Todd Gurley, had himself a really bad week. Mahomes almost put up 40 points. Gurley put up 12.5, but after that, it was pretty weak. The wide receivers, the 3 of them combined for 16 points of Edelman, Crowder, and Gallup. That's not going to get it done. His tight end put up less than a point. That's not going to get it done. He's got Christian Kirk on the bench, who outscored all 3 of his wide receivers in the lineup combined with 16.4. That kind of stuff's not going to get it done. And Hal doesn't make a roster move this week, which I'm pretty surprised about given the outcome. He's 0-2 in the Charlie division, in 11th place overall. And for a team that finished at the bottom of the league last year, I would imagine he's going to want to do something drastic in order to get things righted here. We'll move on to the next matchup here. It was a battle of the 0-1 teams as Chris Chapman's Plaxidental shooting took on Gabe Porras' Done Studying. Gabe, you might want to go back to the drawing board here because your team only scored 65 points. Chaps put up 103 plus thanks to Russell Wilson, a 31-point output from his wide receiving core of Antonio Brown, Amari Cooper, and Michael Thomas. That is a scary 3-headed monster at wide receiver. He doesn't even need to really roster a 4th wide receiver until bye weeks begin for these 4 guys, or those 3 guys. He's got Kenny Stills on the bench. That could very well be the only guy he needs at the wide receiver position. His running backs put up 14, almost 15 in Sony Michel and LaShawn McCoy. I don't necessarily like LaShawn McCoy going forward. He put up a decent game last week, but he certainly did not put up a good week this week. For Gabe, he got just subpar performances across the board except for Odell Beckham. Without Beckham, nobody on this team scores more than 8 points. Phillip Rivers had himself a shit game. The running back combination of David Johnson and Ronald Jones put up 8.3. David Montgomery alone put up 12.8 on the bench. Emmanuel Sanders put up 17.8 on the bench. And other than Odell Beckham, the other two wide receivers, Corey Davis and Deshaun Jackson, combined for 3.8 points. Emmanuel Sanders was a beast on the bench, putting up almost 100 yards and a touchdown and a 2-point conversion. You certainly would want to have him in the lineup going forward, especially considering Deshaun Jackson might be out this week. No roster moves from Gabe, which is surprising. Chris does drop Cam Newton going forward and picks up Teddy Bridgewater. I don't know if I necessarily like that move. Cam's a former MVP and is battling some injuries right now. Teddy Bridgewater's Teddy Bridgewater. He might have some decent weapons, but I don't see him outperforming Cam Newton going forward. Plus, when you've already got Russell Wilson on your roster, what's the point of swapping out your backup quarterback from an MVP to Teddy Two Gloves? We'll move on here, and we'll move on to week 3, guys. This is going to be a fantastic week here. We're going to get the end of divisional play. And with one set of teams all at 1-1, and the other two divisions, one at 2-0, two at 1-1, and one at 0-2. It's gonna be a fun week this week while we figure out who's dominant in the divisions and who's not. Until next week, fellas. Again, I need guests. I need people to come on here. I don't want to be making only 15-minute videos here. I do this for my fantasy baseball league. These things go 3 hours. I'm not talking let's do 3 hours on football. But if we can make it a half hour, 40 minutes, I'll be happy with that. If you want to come on the show, all you got to do is have my number. Let me know. Give me a call on Wednesday morning or Wednesday afternoon. We'll set it up. We'll get you taken care of. Guys, until next week, I'll see you in the league.